There is a specific kind of silence that happens in a crowded room. Not the silence of an empty house, not the silence of grief. It's the silence that lives inside your own skull, while 40 people around you keep laughing, keep clinking glasses, keep breathing normally, completely unaware that your entire life just cracked open in front of you. I was standing in that silence, holding a champagne flute that had gone warm in my hand, listening to my father in law toast to the deal that saved his family's company, a deal I had built with my own hands under a name that wasn't mine, for a client I had promised, on my honor, I would never reveal. And as he raised his glass and said the words, our silent partner, I understood all at once that I had never fully known what I signed up for 5 years ago. Not the contract, the marriage. My name is Elena Hartley. I kept my maiden name professionally, which the Whitfield family found charmingly stubborn at first, and later quietly disrespectful. I ran, I suppose, depending on how you count things after tonight. A small interior design consultancy out of a converted loft above a bakery in the arts district. Nothing glamorous. Good bones though, good light. I built it from nothing, one client at a time, back when I still believed that talent alone was enough to make people take you seriously. I married Daniel Whitfield 8 years ago. He was warm and a little awkward in the way men are when they've spent their whole lives being told they'll inherit something enormous and don't quite know what to do with that weight. His family ran Whitfield Development Group, a real estate firm that had been building shopping centers, office towers, and luxury residences across 3 states for 2 generations. Richard Whitfield, my father in law, had a handshake that could close a boardroom and a laugh that could fill a cathedral. His wife, Diane, curated charity galas the way generals curate battle plans. Daniel's older brother Marcus ran acquisitions and treated every family dinner like a negotiation he intended to win. And then there was me, the interior designer, the one who did the pretty stuff, as Marcus liked to say, usually with a smile that was supposed to soften the insult but never quite did. I remember the first Whitfield Thanksgiving I attended as Daniel's fiancée. Richard asked what I did for work, and when I told him, he nodded the why you nod at a child explaining their finger painting. That's sweet, he said. Good hobby to have while you two start a family. I laughed it off. Daniel apologized later, in the car the way he always did, quietly, sincerely, and completely without changing anything. For years, that was the rhythm of my life inside that family. I was decorative, useful for choosing paint colors at their model homes, useful for staging their showcase properties for magazine photographers, but never once invited into a real conversation about the business, never once asked what I thought about a project's direction. I was Daniel's wife who happened to like fabric swatches. What none of them knew, what I made absolutely certain none of them ever knew, was that 5 years into my marriage, my small studio landed the single biggest client of my career. And I kept it a secret from every single one of them. It started with an email, no signature, no letterhead, just a name, Arya Holdings, and a request for a confidential consultation regarding a series of high value residential and commercial interiors. The email specified, in language so precise it almost felt legal, that any designer engaged for this work would be required to sign a strict non disclosure agreement covering not just the properties themselves, but the identity of the client and the existence of the relationship entirely. I almost deleted it. I got strange requests sometimes, people testing the waters, competitors fishing for information, but something about the tone made me pause. It wasn't arrogant, it was careful, deliberate. I met the representative, a sharp, soft spoken man named Curtis Voss, who described himself only as counsel for the principal, in a private room at a hotel 2 towns over from where I lived, far enough that no one from Daniel's world would recognize me walking in. The principal values discretion above almost everything else, Voss told me, sliding a folder across the table. You will be well compensated, but if you accept, this arrangement does not exist outside these walls, not to friends, not to family. I asked why. That's not information I'm authorized to share, he said, and something in the careful blankness of his face told me not to push. I should have pushed. I understand that now. But at the time, I was a woman who had spent 5 years being told, gently and not so gently, that my work didn't matter. And here was someone offering me a project larger than anything I'd touched in my career, asking only that I keep it quiet. It felt less like a burden and more like a gift, a secret that was mine, something the Whitfields couldn't shrink, couldn't smile condescendingly at, couldn't fold into their version of who I was allowed to be. I signed. For the next 5 years, I lived two lives. By day, in front of the Whitfield family, I was still the wife who did the pretty stuff. I sat through dinners where Marcus described million-dollar acquisitions in loving detail while glancing at me like I might get bored and start talking about throw pillows. But in the other life, the secret one, I was building something extraordinary. Arya Holdings turned out to be developing an entire portfolio of properties, boutique residential buildings, a private members club, eventually an entire waterfront redevelopment project that would come to be known years later as the Marlowe Quarter. I never met the principal. Every interaction ran through Voss or later through a project manager named Renata who handled logistics with brisk efficiency and never once slipped a detail about who was actually paying the bills. It didn't matter to me, not really. What mattered was that for the first time in my professional life, someone was letting me build without limits, full creative authority, budgets that made my old clients' entire annual revenue look like a rounding error. I designed lobbies that made grown businessmen stop and stare. I designed a penthouse that ended up photographed for three different architecture magazines, credited only to an anonymous design consultant at the client's request. I remember calling my sister after that penthouse was finished, practically vibrating with the kind of pride I hadn't let myself feel in years. I can't tell anyone, I told her, laughing and almost crying at the same time, but it's the best thing I've ever made. Not even Daniel? She asked. Especially not Daniel's family, I said. They'd find some way to make it small. I told myself that was protectiveness. I told myself it was strategy. What I didn't examine, not carefully enough, was how easily I had accepted that secrecy from my own family. The family I'd married into had become the natural order of things. The Whitfield Development Group had trouble around my third year with Aria Holdings. A massive project called Prescott Tower, Marcus's pet acquisition, the one he'd bet the family's credibility on, collapsed after a zoning dispute and a financing partner pulling out at the worst possible moment. I watched Daniel come home night after night, grey faced, quiet in a way that scared me more than shouting would have. We might lose the firm, he told me one night, sitting on the edge of our bed with his tie still on, like he'd forgotten how to take it off. Dad won't say it out loud, but I've seen the numbers. If we don't land something big in the next year, we're finished. I held him that night. I meant every second of the comfort I gave him. But there was a small, ugly voice in the back of my mind that whispered, they'll finally understand what it feels like to not be taken seriously. I hated that voice. I hated that some small, wounded part of me had waited years for a moment like this. I never told him about Arya Holdings. Not that night, not in the months after, even as I watched him fold under the pressure of trying to save his family's legacy. Some part of me, and I'm not proud of this, needed to protect the one place in my life where I existed as something more than Daniel's wife who does the pretty stuff. Even watching him suffer didn't feel like enough reason to give that up. Around that time, Voss contacted me with the largest project yet. The client, he explained, was moving forward with a massive mixed-use waterfront redevelopment, retail, residential towers, a boutique hotel under the name Marlowe Quarter. They wanted me as lead interior design consultant across the entire property, an 18-month contract worth more than I'd earned in the previous decade combined. I said yes before he finished the sentence. It was somewhere in the second year of the Marlowe Quarter project that I found the note. I wasn't looking for anything. I was helping Daniel organize old files from the Whitfield office. He'd asked me to help him prep materials for an investor meeting, one of the rare moments he actually wanted my input on something business related, mostly because he was drowning and needed extra hands. Buried in a folder of old correspondence from years earlier, before Prescott Tower even existed, I found a printed email chain between Richard Whitfield and a financial consultant discussing diversification of design talent acquisition and a line that made my stomach drop. Curtis Voss confirms discretion protocols are holding. No connection has been made. I sat very still for a long time after reading that. I told myself it was a coincidence. Voss was a common enough name. Discretion protocols could mean anything in the vague language of corporate consulting. I folded the paper back into the file and put it away and did not tell Daniel, did not tell myself the full truth of what I suspected for almost 8 months, but it sat in me like a splinter. Small incidents I'd brushed off before started rearranging themselves into a different shape. The way Renata, my project manager at Arya Holdings, once mentioned in passing that the principal has a personal connection to this region's development history, then changed the subject smoothly when I asked what she meant. The way 3 years into the arrangement, Voss had casually asked whether I'd ever consider consulting on a family run firm's portfolio, a question I dismissed at the time as idle chatter, but which now felt like it had been testing something. And the coincidence that unsettled me most, the timing. Arya Holdings' offer had landed in my inbox almost exactly 4 months after my wedding to Daniel. I started to wonder, quietly, terribly, whether I had been discovered before I ever thought I'd been discovered. Whether someone in that family had recognized my talent long before Richard Whitfield ever pretended not to see it. Whether the hobby comment at Thanksgiving had been theater. Whether the years of being dismissed to my face while, somehow, my most demanding, most lucrative client kept sending me larger and larger projects, kept being remarkably patient with my schedule, kept mentioning, through Voss, through Renata, flexibility around family obligations, had ever been a coincidence at all. I didn't say any of this out loud. Not to Daniel, not to my sister. I didn't have proof, only a splinter, and a marriage I suddenly wasn't sure I understood the architecture of. The Marlowe Quarter opened to extraordinary success. Boutique hotel fully booked 8 months out. Residential units selling at prices that made local news. It became, within 18 months, the most celebrated redevelopment project in the region, written up in 3 national design publications, credited each time only to Arya Holdings and its confidential design partner. I found out what Arya Holdings actually was on the night of Richard and Diane Whitfield's 40th wedding anniversary. It was a lavish affair, 300 guests, a ballroom rented at one of the city's grand old hotels, a jazz quartet, the kind of event Diane had been planning for over a year. I stood near the back with Daniel's arm around my waist, watching Richard prepare to give his toast, feeling nothing more complicated than mild fatigue and the specific ache of heels worn 4 hours too long. Richard raised his glass. He talked about Diane, about the family, about the near collapse of the firm 3 years earlier, the sleepless nights, the fear of losing everything his father had built, and then he said the words that stopped my heart mid-beat. But we didn't just survive, he said, his voice booming with pride across the ballroom. We came back stronger than ever because of the Marlowe Quarter, the single greatest project this family has ever completed. And I want to raise a glass tonight to our silent partner, the design consultant behind every square foot of that project's success, someone whose work quite literally saved this company and who I am only now finally at liberty to thank properly. He turned, glass raised, and looked directly at me. Elena, he said, smiling wide, we couldn't have done it without you. The room applauded. I heard it distantly, the way you hear things underwater. Daniel's hand tightened on my waist, and I turned to see his face. Not proud, not surprised in the way I was surprised, but caught in something else. Something that looked, God help me, like relief. You knew, I whispered. It wasn't a question. Elena, you knew, I said again, louder this time. Though the applause was already dying down, and people were starting to look at us with the confused curiosity of guests who sense a story unfolding but don't yet understand its shape. Richard approached us, beaming, oblivious, or performing obliviousness so well I couldn't tell the difference. I hope you'll forgive the secrecy, my dear, he said, taking my hand in both of his. Voss insisted on absolute discretion, and frankly so did I, for reasons that made sense at the time. We couldn't risk you feeling obligated to give the family a discount, or worse, feeling pressured into the arrangement because of the marriage. We wanted your talent on its own merits. And my God, did it prove itself? I looked at Daniel. Did you know it was me the whole time? Or did you find out tonight, like everyone else? He didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation told me everything. I found out about a year ago, he said finally, quietly, guests still milling close enough that he had to keep his voice low, which somehow made the confession feel even more like a betrayal. Dad told me, he swore me to secrecy. He said it would ruin the surprise, that he wanted tonight to be special. Special, I repeated. Elena, please don't, I said. Not here. I excused myself to the restroom, locked the door, and stood with both hands braced against the marble counter, staring at a woman in the mirror I barely recognized. 5 years. 5 years of secrecy I had told myself was empowering, was mine, was a rebellion against a family that refused to see me, and it turned out the family had seen me before I ever thought they had. They had simply chosen, for reasons still forming in my mind like storm clouds, to let me believe otherwise. The splinter I'd been carrying for 8 months finally worked its way all the way through. I thought about the timing of Arya Holdings' first email, 4 months after my wedding. I thought about Voss's carefully blank face whenever I asked questions. I thought about Richard's Thanksgiving comment, the hobby remark delivered with a laugh that I now wondered had been calculated to keep me exactly where they needed me, hungry to prove myself, motivated, and utterly convinced that no one in that family valued my work, which made me pour everything into a secret project that, it turned out, belonged to them all along. Had they engineered the marriage itself, somehow steering Daniel toward me because Richard had already identified my talent through some earlier connection I still didn't understand? Or was the marriage real, and only the business arrangement had been the calculated part, Richard recognizing an opportunity to secure my best work at arm's length, cheaply, loyally, permanently, using his own son as the anchor that would keep me from ever walking away, no matter how I was treated? I didn't know which possibility frightened me more. There was a knock at the door, Daniel's voice low. Elena, please, let me explain. I opened the door. He looked racked, the way he had looked during the worst nights of Prescott Tower's collapse, and some old, stubborn tenderness in me almost softened at the sight of it. Almost. Explain, I said. Dad found out about Arya Holdings by accident, Daniel said, running a hand through his hair. About a year and a half ago, Voss made a mistake, mentioned something to a mutual contact that connected back to you. Dad came to me furious at first, honestly, because he thought I'd known the whole time and hidden it from the family for some strategic reason. When he realized I genuinely didn't know, he made a decision. He said we needed you more than you needed us, and if we told you we knew, you might panic and pull out of the Marlowe Quarter deal entirely, right when we needed it most to save the company. He said the safest thing was to let the arrangement continue exactly as it was and reveal everything once the project succeeded, so it could be a celebration instead of a crisis. And you agreed to that, I said. I didn't know how to disagree, Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly. The company was going to collapse, Elena. Real jobs, real people, and you were the only thing standing between us and losing everything my grandfather built. I told myself I was protecting the timing, not lying to you. I know that's not good enough, I know. Did it ever occur to any of you, I said, my voice very steady, very quiet, that the honest thing, the respectful thing, would have been to walk into a room and simply ask me, instead of managing me, instead of deciding on my behalf what I could handle knowing? I'm sorry, he said. I am so sorry. I need to know something, I said, and my voice shook now despite my best effort to keep it level. Did your father ever, at any point before we got married, know about my design work? Did he ever push you toward me? Encourage the relationship because he'd already identified something useful? Daniel's face went pale in a way that told me, before he even spoke, that the question had occurred to him too. I don't know, he said. I swear to you, Elena, I don't know. I met you at Marcus's engagement party. I fell for you because of you. But I can tell you with certainty that Dad didn't already know your name from somewhere before that night. I've never asked him. I've been too afraid of the answer. I didn't go back into the ballroom that night. I called a car, went home, and sat alone in the dark living room of the house Daniel and I had built together, turning the last 5 years over in my mind like a stone I couldn't stop rubbing raw. Here is what I decided. In the days that followed, After the anger had burned down to something colder and more useful, it didn't actually matter, in the end, whether Richard Whitfield had orchestrated the marriage from the very beginning or simply exploited a genuine, unplanned love story once it existed. Both possibilities pointed to the same rotten center, a family that had built an entire architecture of behavior around making me feel small in public while quietly, privately, depending on exactly how large my talent truly was. Whether that began with calculation or was seized as opportunity halfway through, the effect on me had been identical for 5 years: shrink in the light, grow in the dark, and never once be allowed to exist as both at the same time. I met with Voss one final time, alone, no lawyers, no Whitfields. I asked him directly whether Richard Whitfield had contacted Arya Holdings' actual principal before my wedding or after. He was quiet for a long moment, weighing loyalties I would never fully understand, before he finally said, "The introduction came from a mutual acquaintance roughly 6 months before your engagement was announced. I wasn't given the full context, I only followed instructions." 6 months before the engagement, not after, before. I don't know, even now, exactly what that means for the truth of my marriage. I've chosen not to spend the rest of my life excavating it down to bedrock because some truths, once fully unearthed, don't actually set you free. They just give you a more detailed map of your own wound. What I did instead was rebuild the only part of the story I had full control over: myself. I renegotiated my entire relationship with the Whitfield Development Group. Not privately, not through Voss, not through hushed hallway conversations at family dinners, but in an actual conference room with an actual contract, my name, my real full name, Elena Hartley, on the letterhead as founder and principal of Hartley Design Collective. I told Richard, in front of Daniel and Marcus both, that I would continue consulting on Whitfield projects, including any future phases of the Marlow Quarter, but only under my own company's name, at market rate, with full public credit, starting immediately. Richard, to his credit, or perhaps simply to protect the business relationship he now understood he genuinely needed, agreed without argument. Marcus, for the first time in 8 years, looked at me during a business meeting like I was someone whose opinion carried weight in the room. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Daniel and I are still married. I won't pretend the anniversary party ended our relationship, because it didn't. Not cleanly, not the way a story likes to resolve itself. What it ended was my willingness to keep any part of my life a secret out of fear that being fully seen would somehow make me smaller. We're still working through what trust looks like now, knowing what we know, not knowing what we may never know. Some nights that feels like enough, other nights it doesn't. What I carry with me now, walking into my own studio each morning, my studio with my name on the door, with 3 staff designers and a client list I built without hiding behind anyone's discretion, is this: I spent 5 years believing my silence was my power. I have come to understand that it was simply the shape someone else had convinced me my power needed to take. I don't design in secret anymore. I don't need to. And whatever else that anniversary toast cost me, it gave me back the one thing I'd quietly surrendered without ever noticing I'd done it: the right to be taken seriously in the light, not just admired in the dark.